I'm Mark Gagan and you're listening to the Voice of Insurance podcast, produced in association with Advantage Go. Pick and choose your own best-of-breed insurtech and data providers with Advantage Go's ecosystem. Today's podcast is another really vibrant and forward-looking addition to the Voice of Insurance canon. I think that's because it's with one of London's most recently appointed wholesale broking leaders, Tom Quay, who's Managing Director of Acrisure London Wholesale. Acrisure London Wholesale is a little different from many of its peers. Yes, of course, it handles most of the high-end specialist placements that any other London wholesaler does. Indeed, it sources 70% of its business from outside the Acrisure group. But it's the scale of opportunity that it has by being attached to Acrisure's impressive retail network that is particularly interesting. Acrisure has a 5% share of US commercial insurance, but unlike most of its top 10 global insurance broker peers, 90% of its clients have less than 100 staff. These are clearly not the sort of businesses that would historically have come to London for their insurance. But here's the interesting and exciting part. As tech brings unit costs right down and allows risks to be packaged in new and more efficient ways, the London market and some of its more differentiated product might be brought to smaller and smaller original clients in ways that benefit underwriters, clients, and the brokers connecting them. That's the opportunity that Tom and his team are getting to grips with. And that's what makes this such an enlightening and forward-looking discussion. Tom's challenge mirrors that of the entire London market. If it can keep driving unit costs down through digitisation, while at the same time keeping product quality, relevance and innovation high, it will have hit upon a rich winning formula that its brokers will be able to export around the world. And if it can't, the consequences don't much bear thinking about. Tom's great company and is a very strong and open communicator, and this episode is highly recommended for anyone interested in the best opportunities in the global wholesale insurance markets. Enjoy the podcast. Tom, welcome to Voice of Insurance.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Why don't you introduce yourself to anybody who's listening who doesn't know you? Run us a bit through your career and how you've got to be where you are today.
Absolutely. So I'm a cyber broker by background, been in the market.
Wow. So that's what you started cyber?
Yeah.
So that must have been sort of at the beginning of cyber?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I'm not one of the guys that goes around saying I invented cyber, but I was there early doors, and it was a pretty nascent market when I started.
I remember when I was a broker, I walked in 1992, and we had a computer crime policy, gathering dust. It was a piece of paper policy. Yeah. So that's quite exciting sound. I said, yeah, but we've never sold one of those.
Exactly. So I'm old, but I'm not that old. But you know, I think it was a really fortuitous opportunity. Just coming out of the financial crisis, heard about this coverage line, thought I'd have a bit of a punt at it. And it's been honestly the best class of business to grow up in, right? Because we were building a product, building innovation, convincing and working with clients to sell this product.
And I suppose it's nice to know that this is a product that's nailed on, going to grow year after year after year. So you know that your pot's going to get bigger and hopefully your allocation of resources is going to get bigger every year.
Exactly. There's always the opportunity to sell to someone new. And I think that's going to be the case for some foreseeable time.
So you've always been a broker. And then when did you join Acrisure?
Always a broker and plied my trade in the cyber market, built cyber teams around the London market wholesale space. And then was approached by John Sutton, who was the previous CEO of Acrisure London Wholesale.
And he's been on the podcast a couple of years ago.
Exactly, yeah, with Jonathan Tritton, my other colleague, to come across to a business called Acrisure, which no one had heard of, to a company called Beach and Associates, which I hadn't heard of, to start the London wholesale practice. So for me, I was really excited to build a business from the ground up, if you like, but within the protection of a rather large group. So that's been a fun 7 years, building that out from 8 people to a decent broker of scale as it stands.
And when did you take over? You've just taken over?
So I took over at 1-1. It's been a fantastic transition. As I said, we were 8 people at the start and we've pretty much hired everyone handpicked. There's been no M&A, so I know everyone and I'm very excited to be taking the helm for the next phase of growth.
So it's quite nice building organically in that way because you pick them and they know that you pick them and also they picked you because, of course, quite a lot of competition. So they're probably the sort of people who could work at other places.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a huge amount of competition and we've had to set our stall out, if you like. And we've got a very youthful team. We've taken a couple of graduates and school leavers every year for those 6 or 7 years. And one of the proudest parts of this business, I think, is the guys and girls that started 7 years ago are now stepping up to be the main producers in our business. And we just promoted 3 of those guys to lead our teams. So it's a great success story.
But that's always good because, I mean, your success is their success.
It's phenomenal. And the revenue generation, the margin generation is kind of a derivative of that, enjoying building a business together, creating value for our customers.
We might as well talk about this now. What do you pitch to them? When you're out, presumably they're often people who've already got jobs and they've got good jobs. and they're very good at that job, which is why they're on your radar. What do you pitch to them? What's the Acrisure USP that you want to be pitching to them? Say, come over because here's different, it's better, or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's changed quite a lot in the last 7 years, and so it's probably best to frame it currently. We've gone from a business that was, let's say, a decade ago, tens of millions of revenue to closing this year around 5 billion of revenue. So it's been an incredibly exciting and fast.
And that's a global
business. Sorry, that's not London Wholesale, but it's an M&A story. So if you go back a decade, Acrisure were buying tens, if not hundreds of small retail organizations, primarily in the US, and scaling that way. But they didn't really have a huge amount of influence over them from a brand perspective. They left the leadership in place. Obviously, you had to be profitable and great in your local market and everything else. But the fundamental key, and I think this takes us to the present day, was it was built on you must keep your data in a central MI platform. And therefore, this business over the last decade has been built on a core of really, really rich data. So when you fast forward to a wholesale broker in London, we can go into a system now called Auris. We can identify portfolios of business. We understand where it's currently placed, at what deductions, which market, via which intermediaries. And we've started to layer over firmographic information over that as well. So we can start to really build up a really quite innovative and quite specialist view of our portfolio and start to market that into London.
And just to recap on Acrisure London Wholesale, how big are you now? How many people, and sort of roughly how much premium are you handling?
So as I said, 7 years ago, it was a blank piece of paper.
Yeah.
We're well on our way to 1 billion of premium under management, and we hope to do that in the next couple of years. We've been quite controlled over the classes of business that we're in. We have 6 core teams across A&H, healthcare, transportation, cyber, P&C, and delegated authority. The opportunity for us going forward is to start to go into some of those, what we're calling kind of greenfield sites. So, for example, Acrisure has 20% market share in general aviation. There's vast appetite for that in Lloyd's. We don't have the capabilities, so we'll be looking to hire individuals into that role to build a team out, benefit from the distribution, the vast distribution that Acrisure has, and grow in that way.
And what's the headcount? I presume you can't all fit around one table at a Christmas party anymore.
No, sadly not. I mean, we're still going to the Raj 2 for our Christmas party. We can just about get in, but yeah, it's getting in close to hundreds of people. Yeah.
It's interesting. How do you fit in with that Acrisure group? And how should we think of you when we think of wholesale? We think of somebody who can work with any third party. Would it be right, sitting outside here, to describe you as being almost the in-house wholesaler for Acrisure? I don't know if that would put you off, because you don't want to put off working with any other third parties.
I think we're more than that. I know if you look at our revenue today, 70% of it comes from non-Acrisure owned entities.
Yeah.
So that's a great reflection on the expertise we have in-house. These third parties are trading with us almost despite being Acrisure. And what we need to do now going forward is we're going to continue to trade with those third parties, many of which we trade with as their client in the US. Take, for example, the CRCs, RTs, Amwins of this world. We're big trading partners with them, and therefore we trade with them in London likewise. But my challenge going forward is, if you look at the Acrisure portfolio, it's very, very distinct and very, very focused from a strategic perspective. So as I touched on earlier, we acquired hundreds, if not thousands, of small local retail operations.
So that means they've got small local,
correct,
regional clients, right?
So we have 5% of all commercial entities in the US are a customer of Acrisure today. I'm focusing on the US. We have UK, European, and a big entity down in Brazil as well. But if you take the US, 5% of all commercial entities are a customer. And within that volume, 90% have less than 100 employees. So when you look at Acrisure and compare us to some of our peers, we're 5th, 6th biggest broker in the world, but we're probably the biggest when it comes to SMB commercial clients, which is very unique.
Yes, you're not slugging it out for these Fortune 1000 sort of big tenders and all that sort of stuff.
No,
not generally.
And actually, happily, London wholesalers live in a world where we trade with some of the larger independents in the US on their large corporate Fortune 500 accounts. And they're not concerned necessarily at this stage with Acrisure being in their back garden, because we've set our stall out. We're very clear on being an SMB broker.
Because you're very much in a different garden, aren't you?
We are in a different garden. And actually, Acrisure's value proposition, if you like, is to stay in that garden, as you've articulated, but also start to offer adjacent products to those clients. So we're their trusted advisor for their property, their casualty, their employee benefits, but we're now able to sell them technology services, asset management services. We've got the largest title agency in the world. We can start to do a lot of financial services, become more of a fintech business to these guys. And what we're hearing from the customers on the ground is that's how they want to trade across those financial services. They don't want to deal with 15 different professionals across the 15 different product lines that they need to buy. So bringing that back to London Wholesale It just means we've got a very secure client base in the US with which to bring that business to Lloyd's.
So it sounds like that big opportunity, one of the biggest opportunities to really make that Acrisure series, hundreds of thousands of different acquisitions really start to hum together and work together. So if you can go and help manufacture product, now you've got all that data, you've got thousands of small customers. And so you can go and get the London market to help manufacture some differentiated product that you can then distribute through this fantastic network you've built, particularly in the US, but also in other countries in the world. Is that the mission? Is that the right way of articulating it?
So our mission going forward is to be the London market broker for SMBs. We've got a huge pool of those customers in the US, but we think if we solve that mission, we can solve that mission for others as well, because it's a conundrum, right? It's high volume, low premium type business. It's often well handled by MGAs, of which we have a number in the group. But there is a whole cohort of customers who don't fit in the MGA model per se. They're more of brokered risk. So our strategy going forward is we're making heavy investment in London Wholesale from a middle and back office automation perspective, so we can bring the unit cost down of handling a risk from X to Y. So we need to do that in order to make a margin. But equally, we want to connect those innovative products that the large corporates get access to today to the SMB guy. And we think there's a lot of value in doing that for our customer base. And we know there's appetite in Lloyd's for this business as well, because it does traditionally come here. We've got our own syndicate that Lloyd's signed off, in fact, to do this exact thing. So there is appetite. We need to build the platform of which to attract it. And then, as you said, build products to sit on that platform.
And of course, it's attractive for underwriters because, one, it's differentiating, but also it's really stable. I mean, so much less volatile than the large risks, isn't it?
Absolutely. That is the common perception, right? And often what we're trying to do at London Wholesale is we may have access to the data. We might not know what the performance is. So we need to build portfolios of business, understand the performance. And maybe we end up passing this back into our MGA business in time, and we become a kind of conduit with which to pass business back into the US from an underwriting perspective. But Acrisure views the value chain, I think, quite differently and has a very different view on the assets within that value chain. So we've talked about retail. It used to be 800, 1,000 offices. That's now come together under 4 platforms. From a wholesaler's perspective, I can now speak to 4 managing partners, not 800. Super helpful when you're trying to sell product and try and corral programs and facilities. We've then got the second layer of the cake, if you like, which is wholesale. So we've got London Wholesale. We've got my counterpart in Bermuda, just started that entity run by Paul Scope. And then we've got Wholesale in the US, which is our US wholesaler. So we can market globally. Our third layer, you've got underwriting. So we have owned MGAs who don't just underwrite on behalf of Acrisure, but also third parties. And then that fourth layer is Acrisure Re. So we've got Treaty, we've got FAC, we've got RCAS, which is our capital advisory solutions team run by Ben Canagaretna. So they're doing funds at Lloyd's and M&A transactions. And then lastly, our syndicates. So we've got Flux and then we've got Volante. So it's quite a differentiated structure. And if we can get business to run through that value chain, it'll benefit the customer in the long term.
What's the relationship with those underwriting entities? I presume there's a big Chinese wall between you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're underwriting on behalf of their capital. Flux is supported by Acrisure's capital in part, as well as third parties. The two are very different. Flux was set up purely to serve Acrisure and Acrisure's business and bring that to Lloyd's. And they do that via backing our MGAs or backing facilities programs. They are a follow syndicate, so they're not a price maker, but they follow a lead market, and that provides obviously security around having a broker-backed syndicate. Volante we're very close to them. It's owned by Acrisure, of course, and we trade with them as much as possible, but they're a market alongside any other market whereby, I mean that with no disrespect, whereby if the customer's getting the best product and the best price, then we'll trade with them, but also third-party brokers will trade with them as well. So it's a slightly different concept.
And in terms of that global network of wholesale, you've mentioned about the Bermuda, and obviously you've got the US, which is Wholesale, which is independent. Obviously, you've got London in your name. Would you expect at some point you'd be dropping London because you're everywhere, or you're in major wholesale insurance hubs like Singapore, those sort of places?
I think for the time being, the opportunity for us to grow from a relatively small London market broker, given the opportunity with 40 odd billion in the US within our group and our third party clients, is here in London. Never say never, but Bermuda, London, US is a pretty good combination to kick off with.
So you can already see medium term, this is going to be more than enough.
Honestly, sometimes it's focusing on where the lowest hanging fruit is rather than having to dig them out,
You mentioned about aviation. Where you're seeing the opportunities, because obviously the great thing about wholesale is that opportunities arise and problems arise. We were talking before we hit the record button about the LA wildfires. You think these things immediately create new areas of demand. And the great thing about sitting here in London is that you get to find out about them pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a kind of, as you've just said, a kind of reactive part to this role, right? Where disasters strike or issues arise. I mean, sexual molestation liability comes to mind, for example. It's these nuclear verdicts in the US around that type of liability is creating a gap in the market where there's appetite in London to fill that gap in the US that's being created in the GL space. There's still the innovative classes. I mean, we're still big in cyber. We're starting to do more in the carbon credit space. But again, there's the existing business in our portfolio as well, where we know there's appetite in London. We just have to corral it into a portfolio, improve the product and bring it to Lloyd's.
So you're seeing opportunity almost everywhere.
Everywhere. We're building the platform in London with which to hire great expertise in areas that perhaps aviation and others we don't have current expertise, and hopefully we can attract that in and continue to grow.
It sounds like business flows are still holding up very well. Markets ebb and flow. The market is probably softening a little bit.
Yeah.
And often accompanied by that softening, or what aids that softening, is the fact that there's slightly less submission flow.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, first of all, we're still seeing a flow of admitted business into the E&S market. So there's still a growing pool within which for us to fish. Yes, rates are moderating, and frankly, that's great for our customers, both because they're getting a bit of relief in certain classes. But as a broker that wants to innovate product, we're now able to do that because there's a little bit more willingness to discuss innovation, to build new product. And some of our customers are using those savings to buy more limits or expand their coverage where perhaps they had to pare back. So we feel very confident in trading through that cycle. We're not talking up a soft market here per se. I think in areas it's softening, in others it's hardening. So it's an interesting picture to trade within.
It's always good if your product is becoming better value.
Yeah.
Because it's nowhere near being an unprofitable product for the insurer to sell in aggregate at the moment. Obviously, we've just come through annual results, and as a broker, you can point to, well, hang on, your combined ratio still has an 8 at the beginning of it, so you can't plead too much poverty.
Yeah, exactly. There are positives to the cycle. And I think in terms of that submission flow, actually what we're trying to do at London Wholesale is build the platform with which to drive higher submission flows, where going back to the cost of doing business in London, I think that's coming down from a syndicate perspective. That's great. That's going to keep us more competitive as we go through the market cycle. Big fan of that. But from a broking perspective, technology is enabling us to handle higher volumes of premium at a lower unit cost. So where perhaps in the last 4 or 5 years, we may have put a line in the sand and said, please don't send us anything under a value of X. That's coming down. And so we're actually able to access more business at more scale using these new innovative technologies.
So I have flashback to the sort of idle conversation with someone who wants to send you something, and then you get your calculator out as next to the phone and you're thinking, what's the brokerage on that?
Yeah.
Well, sorry, that's not a minimum brokerage.
It's not going to work. Yeah. But we don't want to say that to our customers. And by the way, as the London market wholesaler for Acrisure being an SMB driven business, we can't turn around and go, no, we don't want SMB business. We need to build a platform that's
so you need to find a way of accommodating it.
Yeah.
I suppose one of the ways that's really, really grown in the last decade, and it's really come into its own, has been the MGA space. Do you think there's any sign, now that the market's changed, do you think there's any sign that boom in MGAs for distribution, and also I suppose it's because it's an attractive place for underwriters to go and work, to develop their careers. Do you think there's any sign of that ebbing?
We've seen data recently showing that the market share of MGAs is still growing. It might not be growing as rapidly as perhaps it did in the last 3 or 4 years. But for us as a London wholesale market, MGAs have brought us a huge amount of selection, innovative products, and new ways of looking at this industry. So it's been a net positive, and long may that last. Both our owned MGAs in Acrisure, but also the third parties we trade with in London. Yeah.
My pet theory on that is that as the technology has come into its own, obviously those MGAs, they all start with no legacy, which is great. And sometimes, therefore, they can have better management information than the paper that's backing them, although the paper that's backing them sort of wish they could, but they can't. And sometimes almost a way of digitizing the market. But also, if you're removing friction from the market by making things more efficient, then I suppose you can disaggregate things and you can actually isolate what is the value that an underwriter produces. Well, it can now be clearly measured, and they can be incentivized to say, well, it doesn't make any difference or makes much less difference. Whereas 40 years ago, if you added an MGA to something, you're definitely adding 10 points to the cost. You're not adding 10 points, you're shifting 10 points to them. That's their cost, and that's why you pay them that commission. But you're not necessarily adding to the whole, whereas before you definitely would have been, because you're adding another pair of hands through which all that paper has to go. And now, of course, it's all digital, you can look right through.
The contrarian view could actually be the opposite to a slowdown in MGA growth. And actually, if you see a softening of rate, as we've seen in the cyber market, there's more impetus to delegate to keep your market share and to grow your premium.
Yeah, I would say it's a soft market phenomenon.
Exactly. So it's
almost been a hard market phenomenon as well, which has been odd.
Yeah, so we'll see whether that kind of traditional market cycle continues.
winds are still probably set fair for MGAs.
I think so. And actually, some MGAs are our customers on we place their capacity, for example. They're incredibly sophisticated businesses, and some of them are quasi-insurance companies.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they're backed by their own syndicates, they're backed by their own capital within Bermudan vehicles, etc. So it's a great space, and hopefully long may it last.
And if a big part of your job is helping to aggregate and identify discrete portfolios of business within that Acrisure mega portfolio, what we've seen a lot of, obviously, in the last 4 or 5 years, or probably the last decade even, at other brokers is aggregating those and turning some of those flows, particularly starting with London, into facilities. Is that sort of thing we're going to see with you?
To a certain extent, yes, I think so. Not necessarily because that's a market cycle.
Some sort of mega. Will we see some sort of mega, the Acrisure, deal, whatever it's called?
Well, in order to attract this S&B portfolio to London, we're going to have to build facilities dictated by appetite, which will sit behind the products that we have within our suite on our platform in the London market. So, yes, there'll be facilitization. I'm not sure we're looking to do it necessarily because it's a soft market thing to do to wring a couple more points out of the underwriters. We're doing it because it's the way to handle this high volume.
I suppose it's not sustainable to do something just because it makes a couple of extra points a broker.
It's got to be, the customer's got to win here. And then that's what we'll be looking to do in all cases, yeah.
So definitely we would sort of watch this space, expect to see something.
Absolutely, yeah.
Or things.
Yep.
We're seeing a lot of facilitization but also automatic follow, all working hand in hand and all in parallel. Mm-hmm. How do you think that's going to change the market? How much has it already changed the market?
It's making the placement of business much more efficient from a broking perspective. If you can get a strong lead and then have your keys and your Beazley trackers and your you name it follow, I mean, fantastic. Arguably, Flux was the first tracking market out there, albeit not a smart tracker, there to back lead markets for actual business. And we definitely have a view and a plan to build our own smart tracker to access our open market London business built on our platform. So, watch this space with that regard.
I was looking at your shoes and thinking the traditional way of describing how much labour has been expended in London is whether your shoe leather's been worn out. And I think your shoes are very nice and clean and, pretty good. So
I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
more digital broking.
Yeah. I think so. Look, we can handle higher volumes of business at low cost. That's fantastic.
What's good to see is old-fashioned broking is sort of, Mark, it's past 11 o'clock. Why aren't you out? Why are you sitting in the office? It was like, I'm just preparing this final submission.
Why haven't you got your tie on? Why aren't you wearing a suit? Why aren't you in the office 5 days a week? It's changed quite a lot.
That's why I had to become a journalist. What about AI? That's the other thing we're all talking about. And obviously, it's going to be underpinning a lot of this facilitization and increased sophistication. As you said, Acrisure is majoring and sort of marketing itself as an insurtech business. And it's probably the only broker that's sort of saying that word in its name. Where are you finding the best use cases? There are so many.
Yeah, I mean, I'll come to the use cases, but I just go back to the fact that this business was built on a foundation of data. If you don't have your data in the right place in a structured manner, I think AI is going to be difficult. Yeah. So that's a real advantage for both our retail, but also our wholesale businesses and reinsurance business. But again, on AI, this journey started back in 2019 for Acrisure when we bought a company called Tolco. Thomas Tull's business. He was of legendary pictures fame, Hollywood, made his money in that space, but took early stage AI, propensity to buy models around the kind of advertising online and making sure that you see a James Bond advert and I see a Barbie advert, or what it might be. But we took that concept in 2019, not now when this big AI revolution is on us. I think that's important because our business has been thinking about how to apply AI over that period as the technology has advanced. And it's in areas like we've got a system called Auris, where everyone will, at the broking level, access on a daily basis. That's where they look at their portfolio of customers at the retail level. And rather than going down the golf club and shaking hands and hoping you bump into a customer that looks like the other customers that you sell to because you're quite good at doing that trade, we can now use our database of organizations within the US or your region to use your time more wisely. We can push the retailer towards a customer that's going to be more receptive to the way that they sell, the product suite that they're experts in, and then start to push the product suites with which we think that customer will respond best to. So that's one use case, and that's all AI driven.
It's like the Amazon of insurance, isn't it?
Absolutely. And then again, going back to being a fintech, then why don't we offer them asset management? Why don't we offer them cybersecurity services? Why don't we offer these customers other products? And then if you come back to London, we're using the same system, and within that, we've got Auris Assist, which is effectively a large language model where we can ask Auris Assist any question that our broking team might want to ask it. We can compare policy data, we can write our marketing emails. Clearly, there's the human feedback loop afterwards to make sure that there's a check and balance. But we are at the forefront of using this.
So it's more with customer-facing stuff. What about, can you ask Oris to say, I've got this renewal coming up. Any markets I should be showing it to, that kind of thing?
I don't think our guys are using it necessarily from a marketing perspective. I
Yeah.
think that's what they're very good at. They've got those deep relationships. But for more of the kind of mundane tasks, I've got 3 emails here. Can you just combine those into one, and then I'll review it and I'll send that out to my client? It's a time-saving efficiency space.
And as a wholesaler, I see a lot of the ingestion is from the carrier side, and they're saying, the problem always starts, the broker has sent me an email with 15 attachments, the spreadsheet, a PDF, inspection reports, goodness knows what. And then what they're using AI to solve is to put that into my system, sometimes actually straight into my pricing engine. It can even come up with a quote. At least it's in the system. So you can look at it now, underwriter, you can turn this around quicker than you would have done before. And obviously, as a wholesaler, you often got that same ingestion problem yourself. So are you trying to sort of smooth that? Because obviously, if you can get that straight to the carrier without them having to do all this ingestion, they might like you.
So look, I mean, the concept of building product on a platform to attract SMB business to London, if that has to be underwritten at the box or over email, you want to make sure you're sending 90% likely to quote business rather than 10%. So I think AI definitely will have a role to play in when you're dealing with a vast SMB portfolio, reducing down by appetite the accounts that you then read, underwrite, broke to the market. So yeah, that's something we've got our eyes on, but it's a future state for sure.
Yeah, do you think that at some sophisticated end of all this is that, I suppose, your job as a broker is you've got those personal relationships, you've got those brokers really understand the market, who writes what and who has appetite for what at what time. Do you think an AI could be better than that over time, especially if they're feeding all that new intel from the brokers all the time, where you could almost be reverse engineering the market?
We've got to be on that journey. It remains to be seen. I mean, if you listen to Elon Musk, we'll be all out of jobs in a couple of years' time. And so we're on the journey. I think we're very aware of the technology that exists. My personal view is if we can have our brokers do what they're best at, which is the human side of this business, the relationship side of this business, rather than checking board row against other board row, or checking your ones and zeros, which humans aren't naturally particularly good at, and we can take that off their desk, then that's enough to start off with, right? And then we'll work from there.
Yes, I'm getting ahead of myself and jumping straight to the Z in the alphabet when we haven't got to B.
I think sometimes we have to iterate through these things. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I do go back to the fact that if I was speaking to a potential buyer or speaking to the market, we are on that journey. If you were at a broking shop that wasn't on the AI journey, I think I'd be concerned. The pace of change, I think, is to be determined, right? It's happening. You just want to make sure you're on that.
Do you think also claims, one would presume that could be a very smart use?
Absolutely. I mean, you can see businesses using it already, Lemonade and others, right, in that kind of fast claims process.
Because of course, if placing's unstructured, because placing's more structured naturally because you're only looking at limits and premiums and values and stuff that are fairly, okay, they might not be in the right format, but they're the same things. But of course, a loss is almost by definition a whole load of jumble of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, another area we're looking at is the MRC contract. I mean, it is by definition a structured data set. You have to have the constituent parts of an MRC contract. So we don't for 1 minute think that our technical team will be moving on, but we want to make sure that when we're putting a draft template together from an email, which is effectively what our team do today, if AI can help do that in a second, and then we can have our human team, our deep expertise, finish the contract off, then we should be engaging with that opportunity.
Well, you're part of Acrisure, and of course, Acrisure is an arch acquirer. Well, like most large brokers, of course, are products of many, many acquisitions, and you've got fantastic teams of people who are brilliant at buying businesses. But you're a bit of a sort of exception to the rule because you've been an organic build within Acrisure. But we've seen tons of consolidation within the London wholesale market. It's always a total fool to say that there wouldn't be any more. But I've often felt at different times that probably London market consolidation within the wholesale community is kind of done. And then it never seems to be actually done. There's always another big deal.
Never say never.
Exactly. Where do you think we are at the moment? And obviously, because you could probably click your fingers and get a team flown over here who buy you a broker by the end of the week.
Well, we're quite good at M&A, yeah. Look, yeah, we were a startup business, which was different to the strategy of Acrisure back then, 7 years ago. It has changed slightly since then. We've had other businesses do a similar build out to ALW. The broker cycle is a bit like the market cycle, right? Consolidation, and then one would be a fool to predict this, but at some point, We've always got to make sure that consolidation results in the customer getting a better service and product. If it's consolidation for the sake of consolidation, then I think the customer will probably vote with their feet. So that's where I come back to Acrisure being very hyper-focused, differentiated in its strategy, staying in that SMB place and trying to offer more differentiated, broader product ranges and building in that regard. So who knows whether the London market will be consolidating any further, but we shall see.
It sounds like you've got plenty on your plate and the organic strategy is working fine anyway.
I think so. I think the future of broking is probably less people supported by technology and data. And so the requirement to go and buy another huge broker and roll that in is perhaps necessary now than it's ever been.
I don't know about you, but it seems like we're on the cusp with all this digitalisation. It seems very much a net good for London, that if you can make it easier and quicker and cheaper, more efficient, and obviously to access what are ultimately superior products, bigger limits, more difficult coverages that you might not be able to get anywhere else.
Yep.
If you can then export that around the world easily, then that has got to be a really good net good for London, hasn't it?
Look, if one of the issues for London was cost, well, technology is the way that you're going to bring that cost down. And AI and other innovative tech is about efficiencies as much as anything else, in my opinion. So if we can make the London broker a bit more efficient and therefore drive costs down, then we'll be able to go into that smaller business realm that perhaps previously has been more difficult for us to attract.
And I suppose, yes, and if every broker in the Acrisure network can press a sort of send it to London button and it goes bash and it starts pinging them answers very quickly, then that's got to be a really good thing, isn't it?
We'd run out of capacity very quickly, I think, if that happened.
Well, we'd find more.
We're hoping for that. Yeah, absolutely. We want to provide a product suite to these customers that perhaps they couldn't access previously. We want to connect London market solutions to our SMB client base, be that Acrisure or third party, frankly. So that's our mission. If we can get it right, there's a huge opportunity for us.
Yes, it's a really good proposition. And then now you just have to execute it, Tom. So you have to do the work.
Yeah, it's differentiated, right? I think you've got to be differentiated in this market, and we're trying to be that.
I've come to the end of all the things I wanted to chat about, but I don't think there's anything you want to add before we go.
No, thank you. It's been great.
Thanks very much, Tom. I really appreciate it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, don't forget to subscribe or leave a like or a review or recommendation on whatever podcast platform you used to access this programme. These really help get the word out. Before we go, just a quick reminder that advertising slots are available here and in other places in the Voice of Insurance podcasts. Podcasting is the fastest growing medium and attracts a high quality audience of key decision makers. It's also an intimate medium where you, the listener, are right in the room with me and the interview subjects. Needless to say, that means it's a great way of getting your message out directly to an audience because you know you've got their full attention. It's also very cost effective. So get in touch with Mark at thevoiceofinsurance.com to find out how you could be speaking directly to the industry.
The Voice of Insurance is produced in association with Advantage Go. Release your underwriters to underwrite with Advantage Go's underwriting platform.
Voice of Insurance is produced by me, Mark Gagan. Music was written by Anna Gagan and produced by Carlos Gagan. Check out more podcasts and written comment pieces at www.thevoiceofinsurance.com.